wilderness. So there are very few hiking trails here in Denali. Most of the hiking trails are concentrated around the entrance area and the Savage River where we just passed. So when people are hiking out here, they are usually finding their own trail, which can be a really exciting way to experience a place like this. Or it could be really terrifying, I guess, depending on your point of view. But that's what the green buses are all about, offering some flexibility for folks that want to hop off and hop back on. And maybe just walk along the road for a little while. Not a bad way to do it. But again, we got onto the gravel road a couple minutes ago. Fortunately, we have a pretty amazing road crew that works very hard to keep our road in good shape. This is not an easy road to maintain, and it was not an easy road to build. They started building this park road back in 1923, and it wasn't completed till 1938.
Wow.
So that's 15 years to build 92 miles of road. That's slow going. While they were working on this road, the Alaska Road Commission built little cabins along the way, about every 10 miles or so. So about every 10 miles they'd have a little cabin that they'd use as a cookhouse and for storage, and then they'd have a tent camp set up around those cabins for their employees. Some of those little cabins built during road construction still stand, and they're still used today, almost 100 years later. Park rangers can use those little cabins in both summer and winter when they're out on bobsled patrols. So I'm going to point out a couple of those Alaska Road Commission cabins to you on our way in. Just like for you to have a little background on that before we get there. During the peak of our summer season. This park is lovely at any time of year, I think, but right at the height of summer, things are green and lush, and we have quite a few wildflowers blooming. I'll try to point out some of those to you along the way. We're having a pretty good wildflower year so far, I think because we had a lot of snow this past winter. We have had a pretty dry start to the summer, unusually so, but that was balanced out a little bit by a lot of snow this past winter. Generally, we don't get a whole lot of snow out here. The average yearly snow total for Denali Park is about 80 inches. 80 inches of snow might sound like a lot, depending on where you're from, but it's not really if you consider how long winter is out here. Every season in Denali goes by quickly, except for one. Winter is long. So this past winter we started getting significant snow accumulation in mid-September. It's pretty unusual. And the last snowfall of the season was May 16th. So it really didn't start to melt until the very end of May. That's 8 full months of winter weather. So if you spread 80 inches out over 8 months, really not a whole lot. But this past winter, Denali Park headquarters recorded 176 inches of snow. So more than double our usual average. Beat the previous record by a couple of inches. The record from before was from 1970. And those records go back about 100 years, and no other winter in those 100 years even begins to compare with this winter and winter of 1970. So definitely an unusual one. They had one pretty crazy storm in December near Christmas that dumped a few feet of snow, and then a couple inches of rain, warmed up enough to rain, froze up again and dumped another couple of feet of snow on top. So in the midst of our snowpack this year, there was a thick layer of ice. And that was problematic for really every creature that lives in and around this park, including the humans. Moose, for example, have very long legs that usually allow them to walk through any deep snow they might encounter. They're also big, heavy animals, so with that layer of ice in the snowpack, moose would break through that ice. That tore up their legs, made it difficult for them to get around. Moose are generally solitary animals. They don't travel in herds. But this past winter, they were so desperate to find spots where there wasn't deep snow that they were gathering in groups. I saw some photos of maybe a dozen moose in the same area. They were gravitating towards places like plowed driveways and roads and railroad tracks, which isn't really ideal, of course. Caribou, on the other hand, usually find their food in the winter under the snowpack. They eat the tiny plants, the mosses and lichens that grow on the tundra. And so in the winter, they'll actually dig down underneath the snow to get some of that food. With that layer of ice in the snowpack, it made it difficult for them to get to the food they need and stay strong. That's a couple of examples, but really, it was a challenging winter for all the animals and people around here. So I'm sure we'll be seeing some consequences of that for a while, but it is nice to see it looking like summer and to be able to see the mountains out here today. Got a little bit of haze from the wildfires, but much better visibility. We've had some of the days in the past month. Keep in mind when you're mountain gazing that everything over about 8,000 feet here at Denali Park is covered in snow year-round. So any mountains that are taller than 8,000 feet are going to be all white all the time. That includes the big mountain, Denali, at 20,310 feet. So far, Denali has not been visible for us. We're pretty far away from it at this point, about 80 miles away from the big mountain. And our visibility right now is probably only maybe 10 or 15 miles away. So mountains that we can see off to our left are in the 5,000 to 7,000 foot range. Little bits of snow here and there, but not completely covered like the taller mountains would be. You may have noticed we've already gone up and down some hills. That's going to happen a lot today. We're not traveling at a particularly high base elevation on this trip. If you have traveled in somewhere like the Rocky Mountains or the Himalayas or the Alps, it might come as a surprise. We started our trip at only about 1,500 feet in elevation, and the highest point on the park road is about 4,000 feet. There's a northern harrier flying out at our 11 o'clock, flying pretty low over the brush out here. Oh, went a little too far. Yeah, just went a tiny bit too far, but it's over on our left-hand side. You might see it again. Those are also known as marsh hawks, and they do migrate, so they spend the summer here and then the winter down in the southeastern U.S. and Mexico, not New Mexico. I lost track of that one, but that's a bird we might see a couple times today. Northern harrier, cruising around pretty low over the tundra, looking for small mammals to eat. But like I was saying, our highest point of the day is a little bit less than 4,000 feet. So for our entire trip, we are significantly lower than the city of Denver. But I think it looks like we're higher up than we are because our tree line is so low. We don't really have trees growing above about 3,000 feet here in Denali. So the type of plant life you see at about 4,000 feet here is similar to what you might see at 11 or 12,000 feet down in Colorado. That's what happens when you come this far north. Down at our lower elevations, so particularly at the start of our day and when we come back down the hill like we're doing right now, we're in the boreal forest, which is also known as the taiga. That's T-A-I-G-A, taiga. The taiga, or the boreal forest, is a type of northern forest that covers a lot of the planet, as it happens. And some of the spruce trees you can see around you are pretty big, but if you look up higher on the hillside, up towards tree line, you might notice a lot of very small spruce trees. Tiny little spruce that are not necessarily young. We have such a short growing season out here and such cold temperatures that spruce trees grow really slowly at our higher elevations. They might only grow an inch in 10 years. So some of those little spruce trees could be 100 years old. Obviously, the larger trees down lower here grew faster than that. But when we get up above tree line, you'll have the chance to see some high alpine tundra. And I think sometimes when people hear that word, tundra, they picture a frozen, barren wasteland. That is not at all what's going on out here. There is a lot of plant life on the tundra. Usually, as you get up to higher elevations, the plant life on the tundra is very small and it grows very tightly together. When those plants grow tightly together like that, they form their own little microclimate and make a more hospitable environment for them to grow. And again, those small plants that grow on that high tundra are an important food source for caribou and other animals out here. This time of year, everything out on the tundra is green and lush, stretching up to some pretty high elevations. So I think you are going to think I am totally nuts when I tell you we are in a subarctic desert. This is a semi-arid desert climate, believe it or not. I know that sounds crazy. This doesn't look like a desert at all, especially this time of year. But we get very little overall precipitation out here. Oh, there's a couple of ptarmigan on the road. One of my favorite birds. It is the Alaska state bird. There's a ptarmigan right in the middle of the road, the willow ptarmigan. And there's a whole family of them. So there's an adult in the middle of the road. There's another adult and some chicks over to the left that are 11 o'clock. I don't want to scare them away, but I'm going to try to kind of adjust here. Yeah, so there are a bunch of little ones running along the side of the road. It's super cute.
Alaska state bird.
So keep your voices quiet, and I'm going to try to just kind of creep up next to them. I don't know if that'll work, but we'll try.
Where are they? I see them. Did you get them? Where are they? Oh, there. Baby, mom and dad and babies.
Now that they're kind of up in the brush,
How much damage does this
they blend in pretty well, but you can still see one on the very edges of the road here.
Take baby.
And a couple
Baby chick.
shady Or 10 o'clock and then another one back there at 9 o'clock that blends in with the brush, but it's just off the road. A little
Yeah, going
bit
inside, going inside.
Did you see that?
at 9 o'clock.
They went inside. I will come.
The butterfly, is the butterfly?
And the yellow butterfly.
See that?
Yeah. So again, that's the Alaska state bird, the willow ptarmigan. And that's ptarmigan with a P. There's a silent P at the beginning, so it's P-T-A-R-M-I-G-A-N. And the ptarmigan are year-round residents. They're one of the few birds that's here all year. I think that's only fair. If they're going to be the state bird, they should probably be year-round residents. But they turn all white in the winter, brown in the summer. So right now they're entirely brown. The underside of their wings stays white year-round, so if they were to fly, and they do fly, but if you were to see them fly, you'd see the underside of the wings is still white. And that was an adult male and an adult female. The males do stick around to help raise the young, which is pretty uncommon in the animal kingdom, but with those birds, they do have a nice little family unit there. They also, in addition to turning white in the winter, they grow feathers on their feet in the winter. So they basically grow themselves little booties to keep their feet warm. Make a really cute image. Lovely. Well, that's only the second set of ptarmigan chicks I've seen so far this year. They are still pretty young, so they're just starting to get out in the world. I think I was in the midst of talking about the fact that you're in a desert out here. Which, again, I know that sounds crazy, but we actually don't get that much overall precipitation every year. Our average yearly total is about 15 inches for the whole year, which is really not a lot. And the vast majority of that falls in the summer. June, July, and August are the rainy season out here. So this is not what a typical summer day looks like in Denali. It doesn't necessarily rain all day, every day. But we spend a lot of time overcast with at least a chance of rain. It does snow here in the winter, obviously. Usually not as much as this past winter. A lot of times it's too cold to snow. When it's 30 or 40 below, there's not a lot of moisture in the air. So not a whole lot of snow is produced at temperatures like that. What snow does fall tends to stick around since it usually doesn't warm up. So we usually have enough snow on the ground for things like dog mushing, but it's not generally a source of a lot of moisture out here. So we don't have a lot of overall precipitation, but we do have a lot of plant life, and you may be wondering how that's possible. The secret to that is permafrost. I'm going to talk about permafrost more in just a second, but our first Alaska Road Commission cabin is coming up on our left just before the bridge here. There will be another one on the right in a little while for those of you on the other side, but there's a little log cabin tucked into the trees over here that was built in 1926 when they were working on this park road, so it's almost 100 years old and still used spring, summer, fall, winter, all seasons by the park rangers out here. There's a cozy little wood stove in there. Comes in handy when they're out on dog sled patrols. And we're about to cross the Sanctuary River right here. Running pretty high with quite a bit of snow melt still coming off the mountains.
That's the river we were at yesterday.
So permafrost, as I mentioned, permafrost is the secret. Permafrost is the reason this ecosystem exists. It's the crucial ingredient. And permafrost is a permanently frozen layer of ground underneath us. It can be varying depths depending on where you are. It varies widely. But on top of the permanently frozen layer, there's what we call the active layer. That active layer thaws and freezes with the seasonal cycle. So the permanently frozen layer underneath acts soil, and we would not be able to support the plant life we have out here. So permafrost is the key. And that permafrost causes a phenomenon you can see around you in this forest. As we come through here, you might notice some trees leaning at funny angles. They look different than the damaged trees we saw a while back, the ones that were broken and bent. In this case, coming through here, the entire trunk of the tree might be leaning at a strange angle. We're passing through a drunken forest, so those are drunken trees, and that is a scientific term, believe it or not. The roots of these trees are pretty shallow because of that permafrost layer, and when the active layer thaws, the tree's roots shift. Maybe that makes the tree lean to the side. When it freezes up again, the tree remains frozen in that leaning position. So that's how these trees out here get drunk. It's all about permafrost and that active layer on top. This is not the only place you can see drunken trees around the park or throughout Alaska, so keep an eye out. You'll see more of those. There are a lot of good examples coming through this forest. More and more of our permafrost is thawing as our climate gets warmer. And I'm not talking about the active layer. That active layer thaws every year. But the permanently frozen layer may not be so permanently frozen. Our average yearly temperature has gone up. We notice that particularly in the winters here in Denali. In the last 70 years, the average winter temperature here has gone up by 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a lot. It's still a cold climate, don't get me wrong on that. But it turns out that a lot of the permafrost is just barely below freezing. So a temperature change that significant can make a big difference to the permafrost. Back in the 1950s, this park was underlain by about 75% permafrost. So 75% of the 6 million acres had a frozen layer underneath. By the early 2000s, that was down to about 50%, but they believe that by 2050, it will be down to 6%. So we are going to go from 75% permafrost down to 6% in about a century. And the way things have been accelerating, it will be down to 0 not too long after that. Obviously, that has big impacts on the plant life and wildlife we have out here. Remember, it is the permafrost keeping the moisture trapped in our soil. And this also has big impacts on infrastructure throughout Alaska, including this park road. Much of the ground that this park road was built on 100 years ago was underlain by permafrost that is now thawing. The reason we are turning around at mile 42 instead of going a bit further into the park is because the road is closed at that point to all vehicle traffic. A couple miles further up at about mile 45 of the park road, an ongoing landslide has wiped out that section of the road completely on a very, very steep hillside. I say ongoing landslide because it was happening very slowly for quite a while. That part of the road was built on what they're now calling a rock glacier. So there's ice under there that was moving and melting. About 10 years ago, that part of the road was sinking a couple inches every year. So it was measurable, but not too alarming. About 5 years ago, it was a few inches a week. In 2019, it was a few inches a day. And last summer, in August of 2021, that section of the road bed itself, was dropping about a foot a day. Over half an inch an hour. And we were still driving over it. We do have an amazing road crew. They did an incredible job keeping the road open much longer than anybody could have expected. They brought in 100 truckloads of gravel every week and essentially rebuilt that section of the road every couple of days. But eventually that was not cost about $55 million and take at least a couple of summers to complete. There hasn't been any work on it yet this summer. They're still in the process of getting a contractor, and our summer season, our construction season, is very short. So it'll be at least a few years before we have access to anything beyond that point. So this is a big change directly related to that permafrost though. In the meantime, we enjoy what we have. As we're coming down the hill, you might have spotted the Teklenika River out to our right. Our rest stop will be at a spot along the Teklenika River in about 10 minutes, in case you were curious. Out here near the Teklenika, this is where they found the earliest evidence of humans here in Denali. They found some stone tools near the river here that they were able to date to almost 13,000 years ago, 12,900 years ago. 13,000 years ago, people weren't living here in any kind of permanent settlements as far as we know. They were passing through, so they were following herds of wild game, hunting some animals that still exist out here and some that no longer exist in this area. But they believe that the earliest people and animals to live around here probably came across the Bering land bridge from Siberia. Thousands of years ago, there was more sea ice, so the sea levels were lower, and there was a strip of land across what is now the Bering Strait. Alaska and Siberia were connected by land. So people and animals walked across that strip of land and populated the Americas. And when you think about it,
Wow.
we're in a pretty interesting spot. If you're headed from Siberia into the Americas, you're going to come through Alaska, and you might come through somewhere pretty close to this park. We're kind of right in the middle of that highway, if you will. So it makes sense we would have people out here 13,000 years ago or more. The native Alaskans from this part of interior Alaska are the Athabascan people, and that is a big group. Within that, there are linguistic and ethnic divisions, but broadly, the native Alaskans from around here are the Athabascans. And the buses that travel on this park road are run by a partnership, a joint venture between two companies. Aramark, a large company based in Philadelphia, and Doyon, a native corporation here in Alaska. Back in 1971, the U.S. Congress created 12 native corporations in Alaska, giving some land rights to native Alaskans, and Doyon is actually the largest of those 12 native corporations. run in a zigzag pattern or maybe hide behind a tree. You can evade a moose that way. So yes, you can run from a moose. Might be a good idea. Do not, under any circumstances, run from a bear. Do not run from a predator like a grizzly bear. You will activate their chase response. And that doesn't sound like any fun at all. If you did encounter a grizzly bear, best thing to do in that situation would be to back away slowly, wave your arms in the air, make yourself look bigger, and speak in a calm voice, which might be difficult in that situation, but that's all you have to do. You don't necessarily have to yell at the grizzly bear, just use that human voice. Remember, we're trying to keep the animals from getting used to the sound of our voices, and this is a big reason that we do that. When the grizzly bear in Denali hears a human voice, that is thankfully still an unfamiliar sound for them. They hear that sound and they don't know what you are. You're not something that grizzly bear associates with food in any way. You're kind of a mystery to that bear, and it wants to leave you alone, which is the goal. Now, please don't let me freak you out with any of this. That is not my intention at all. It is highly unlikely you'll have to deal with this at a rest stop. But these are good things to know when you're out in the wilderness, just in case. And you do want to stay away from smaller wildlife as well. Things like squirrels or birds. Those are wild animals too, so just give them much space. Of course, you would never feed an animal in a national park. So do not feed any animals you find out here. And that's one of the reasons we keep all food on the bus. So any snacks you have, keep them all on the bus today. Keep all the trash on the bus, and that'll keep crumbs away from the animals and remove any temptation you may have to feed them. Anytime we get to a rest stop, please give me a chance to hop out first. So just give me a second to get parked and jump out. As soon as I'm out that front door, you can start to unload. Please watch your step getting off the bus. The step from the bus itself to the ground can be a big one, so please be careful getting off. And watch out for traffic at the rest stops. There will be other buses moving around, so step aside and stay out of the way. Don't walk in front of a moving bus. That's never a good idea. The restrooms themselves will be off to the right from where we park. There are some in the middle that are designated for men, and then there are single unisex restrooms. I highly recommend getting into those restrooms when we arrive before more buses roll in behind us. So get your restroom break out of the way, and then there's an overlook over the Teclanica River you can go check out. We will return to the same rest stop, probably about an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2 hours or so, after this first stop. So I always recommend using the facilities every chance you get. We do not have any restroom facilities in between, so take advantage of them while you got it. I'll set a time for us to reconvene, and that is our departure time, so please don't wait until that time to start getting back on the bus. It can take a while to get 50 people back on board, so give yourself a couple of minutes to settle back in and be ready to roll at whatever time we set, and I'll let you know what that is when we get parked. Some of our fabulous road crew, hard at work right there. Moving some gravel around. I will have some water bottles available for you out here on the engine compartment right by the front door. So grab a water bottle when you get back on. Dry climate, stay hydrated. They are aluminum water bottles, so they are very reusable if you want to take some with you on your trip. Also very recyclable. So grab one of those when you get back on board. And again, rest stops are a great place to answer any questions or to ask any questions you may have of me. Let me know timed this perfectly. I love it when that happens. Things are a little different this year. In the past, we'd roll into this rest stop and there'd be 9 or 10 buses parked in a row here. Even though we're getting back to busier times, it's still nicely distributed lately. So take advantage of the fact that we're here alone. I think there's another bus about to roll in. So restrooms are off to the right. 2:42, so we want to do about 15 minutes here. Let's aim to leave a couple minutes before 3. So, well, 2:58. 15 minutes from now.